morning, everyone. Welcome to First Parish Unitarian Universalist in Canton. My name is Joe Amster, and I'll be your worship associate today. We have a special guest with us. It is the Reverend Bruce Taylor. He attended Andover Newton Theological School and was ordained to ministry in 2009 after a long career as a software developer. Bruce has served as minister to congregations in Bellrica, Ashby, Leominster, and Wakefield. In his free time, he likes to play the flute, do creative photography, and spend time in the woods. He lives in Nashua, New Hampshire with his beloved wife, Loretta Hubley. She is an artist. If you'd like to get to know him more, obviously, take some time to enjoy our fellowship hour. We'd love to have you join us.
I invite you now to join with me in a responsive reading from the Gray Hymnal, number 665, Transcendental Etude. No one ever told us we had to study our lives.
Make our lives a study, as if learning natural history or music.
That we should begin with the simple exercises first and slowly go on to trying the hard ones.
Practicing till strength and accuracy become one with the daring to lead into transcendence.
And in fact, we can't live like that. We take on everything at once before we've even begun to read or mark time. We're forced to begin in the midst of the hardest movement.
The one already sounding as we are born.
Amen. A good friend of mine, who had worked many years in a print shop, decided to become an electrician. Along with many other skills, this required that he use algebra, which he hadn't seen in a very long time. I gave him a bit of coaching on his homework, and it usually came down to the same question, actually a meta question. I would ask him, what kind of problem is this? To ask this question and to teach the habit of asking it is more useful than any answer I might give. Church questions can be messier than algebra sometimes. Sometimes they represent problems to solve, upgrading the windows in the sanctuary, picking the best sound system. Such problems to solve may take a lot of time or money or energy, but they are tractable. And once fixed, they tend to stay fixed for a while. Other church questions represent more than problems to solve. We may disagree on an issue because we have different priorities, even competing values. In such a situation, it helps to remember that we're in covenant. We may agree to disagree, or we may search for a consensus, but the question's never really settled once and for all. If we look deeper into the question, we can see that there are opposing forces at play, and these forces tend to come in pairs. For example, in-reach and outreach, stability and change, reflection and action. Consider in-reach and outreach. By in-reach, I mean what a church does to respond to the needs of its members for pastoral care, for spiritual nourishment, for a sense of community. For many people, that's why they come to church and why they stay. But if in-reach is all we focus on, it can lead to a culture of narcissism. As a church member, my main concern becomes, what does this church do for me? As a tightly knit community, we become closed to outsiders. They may come to visit, but they don't stay since they don't know how to fit in. So a church needs to focus on outreach, helping people in the community, including the public in our activities, spreading the good news of Unitarian Universalism. As a result, we connect with a wider range of people. We get a clearer sense of why we're needed. But if outreach is all we do, we're not actually a church anymore. We wither on the vine if we don't take care of our own people. Now let's consider stability and change. In a congregation, we have traditions and practices that made us who we are today. We have a familiar spiritual home, a place that we come every week. We have ways of doing things that are predictable, time-tested. But if we do the same things all the time, we may become stagnant. We may become unresponsive to changes in the world around us. For all these reasons, some people favor change and innovation. The congregation will be refreshed by new ideas, made bold by the taking of risks. We will become attuned to the world around us, and perhaps we will grow. Yet, too much change can be disruptive. We can't be sure that the good things that we come here for will continue to be here. We may lose important parts of our tradition upon which our identity is based. Now let's consider reflection and action. We need to look inward, to take stock, to cultivate the truth that we find in experience. But if all we do is look inward, we lose our connection to the world. We need to engage that world, express the truth we find ourselves, shape the world by our actions. Yet, if we focus exclusively on action, we'll burn ourselves out. In all our doing, at the expense of our being, we won't learn very much from our experience. In all these examples, the problem doesn't seem to lie with the priorities. They're good priorities. The problem lies with how we frame the question. If we say, should we do X or should we do Y? Should we favor this approach or should we favor that approach? We could pick one or the other, or we could try to split the difference. But these options will leave some people out in the cold. We could even try to mix the different approaches, which would be like mixing the colors of the rainbow into one drab, muddy gray. Now we could try to establish a balance point between choice A and choice B. For example, we could decide how much stability and how much change we're willing to tolerate right now. But if we're hoping for a lasting solution, we'll be disappointed because the balance point will keep shifting as the world changes and as we change. Still, we are moving in a positive direction when we speak about balance. We honor the dynamic push and pull of incompatible options. To develop the ability to hold this creative tension is a starting point for spiritual growth. What remains missing in our understanding is in framing our choices as either or. You've probably seen the picture of two faces in silhouette facing one another. I've included this picture in your order of service. The space between the two faces has the shape of a goblet. Now, we could disagree about what the picture represents. You might say it's two faces. I might say it's a goblet. I might even convince you that it's a goblet. But if so, have we resolved the dispute? Not really, because each answer is correct. And besides that, each answer depends on the other answer. The goblet creates the outline of the faces, and the faces create the outline of the goblet, even though we can't see both at the same time. At this point, I'd like to give a name to this quality of two things that seem to oppose one another, but also depend on another. The word is polarity. The Taoist tradition has a deep appreciation for polarities and the unity that underlies opposing forces. This unity is expressed in the symbol of yin and yang, a circle divided into two sections where one flows into the other. Again, I invite you to look at the picture I've provided in the order of service. You may notice that the white half of the circle contains a black dot, and the black half of the circle contains a white dot. And these remind us that each half of the circle contains the beginnings of the other. The yin-yang symbol refers to many dualities such as light and dark, male and female, birth and death. It helps us to see the cosmos as an ongoing process in which everything that we can touch and see and imagine emerges from the emptiness of pure potential and returns to it again and again. For a concrete example, consider our own bodies and the simple act of breathing. You don't get to choose between inhaling and exhaling. You don't settle the matter once and for all by filling your chest up halfway with air, because your body needs oxygen. So you inhale. There's an advantage to inhalation. You get the oxygen you need. There's also a disadvantage that emerges. You now need to get rid of the carbon dioxide that's built up. So you exhale. But when you're done with that, you're not done yet, hopefully. You're low on oxygen, so you'd better inhale again. From this basic example, we can say a few things about polarities. First, you're never done with change. Second, if you dwell at one extreme for too long, it becomes counterproductive. There's a definite downside to holding your breath, for example. The longer you stay at one extreme, the greater you need to move towards the opposite extreme. That's one way to describe health. We move freely between the extremes in a process that includes both. That process has a purpose. In the case of breathing, it's more life. We may disagree on life's purpose, but it certainly includes its continuation. One way to describe good and evil is that the good upholds the free movement of life, whereas evil blocks that movement. Facing competing priorities in church life, as well as life in general, it helps to consider the purposes that these priorities are pointed towards. Consider stability and change again. Many churches haven't managed that polarity very well. You can see evidence of this all over New England. Some Yankee meeting houses on the town common are empty now. Some converted to use as performance halls or office spaces or museums. In managing the demands of stability and change, some of these congregations dwelt on the need for stability for too long, or they misconstrued their purpose as simple survival, serving their own people, or reenacting their glory days. When we celebrate the opposing pull of change, we create the opportunity to evolve towards a larger purpose. We're grounded in a certain lineage, certainly, enriched by collective memory and know-how. As part of this loving tradition, we have a purpose to know and to bring about beloved community. How shall we make best use of our polarities then? We can take turns. Consider the example of worship. Different people favor different styles. Some enjoy intellectual stimulation. Some come for the music. Some come to be inspired. Others to be reassured. Some want to be awakened. Others hope to get a few minutes of peace and quiet. We can't always satisfy these needs in the single worship service, but we can take turns. Another approach is to do things in parallel. So, for example, we can cultivate both inward spirituality and outward social action. When we do things like this in parallel, we do need to be sure that the people are talking, even taking part in the different activities, and not forming isolated subcultures that don't communicate. At the end of the day, we need to attend to the cues that life gives us and accept the seasons of change. In the words of a great Hebrew teacher, "For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. I'm not going to continue with that reading because I'm not sure there's ever a time for war, although it's always time for peace. I don't think there's ever a time for hate, although it's always time to love. Not all opposing forces are to be affirmed and celebrated. Today's political environment is sick because it's so polarized. We've gotten to the point where we no longer name the polarities that drive our differences. We identify people with positions at opposite extremes. We identify us with the positive side of our position, and that with the greatest good. We identify them with the negative side of their position, and that with decay and dissolution. In so doing, we block the flow of life-sustaining energy that keeps us alive and growing. Hence, our most basic work here is to embody the work of reconciliation in our practices of hospitality, our deep listening, and our authentic dialogue. Treating each one of us, whether we agree or disagree, as essentially worthy of respect, recognizing the creative tensions that move us towards a higher purpose. So may it be. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of the world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move as we go in peace.